morning. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Kent. I am Lori Merkin-McGee, and I serve this congregation as a commissioned lay minister. I'm joined in welcoming you by Mike Havancic, our service leader this morning. Thank you for joining us this morning as we gather once again, both in person and on Zoom, as a spiritual community that seeks to be diverse and inclusive as we inspire love, work for justice, and grow together in community. I want to express my gratitude to our team leading worship, including our guest musician, Mara Lee and Katie Havancic, our administrator, Mary Beth, Julie, Jen, and Lois, who are running our technology today, and Brad, who records our service. Radical hospitality, being a welcoming and inclusive community, is one of our highest values as a gathered community sharing life's journey. Now let's take a moment to breathe, to enter into this time of community once again, and to invite the Spirit of life to be present among us as we reflect on our ever-changing world. Come, let us worship together. I neglected to say Mike's name a minute ago because I was so excited about Katie, so thank you to Mike as well. Just over 5 years ago, my spouse of 21 years, suddenly and without much warning, walked out the door and left our life together behind. Sure, we had our share of problems, but I thought we were working things out. I believed we were moving forward and making necessary changes to improve our relationship. So when she told me she was leaving, I was completely blindsided. The shock of her announcement left me feeling like a trap door had unexpectedly opened under my feet, and I was rapidly free-falling into a pit of despair and anguish. My whole world was turned upside down. Not long before she left, we had been talking about our 25th anniversary, which was only a few years away. We were planning future vacations and fixing up the house and doing typical married couple stuff. I thought I knew what the rest of my life would look like. Our grandchildren would grow up, she and I would grow old together. We would simply live a life side by side. And then she was gone. And that future I had envisioned became a gaping black hole. What would my life look like now? How would I fill that space? At the time, I couldn't possibly imagine. I was in too much pain to think about anything beyond the moment right in front of me. Over time, as happens, the hurt lessened, and I slowly began to see a light at the end of that black hole. As more time passed, that light got brighter. I began to see my future not as a black hole, but a blank slate to be filled whatever way I chose. My future was mine to decide. It was the first time in my entire life that my life was my own, and I embraced it. Being on my own for those couple of years was the best thing that could have ever happened to me. I learned so much about myself, but you could never have told me that in those early days. Robert Frost once said, "The best way out is always through." Indeed, how can we recognize joy if we don't know sorrow? How can we know love if we don't also know grief and loss? Life is uncertain. Nothing is guaranteed. It's how we face it that matters. And that is a choice that is always our own. As Unitarian Universalists, we light a flame within a chalice to unite us in worship, to remind us of our ongoing search for the light of truth within us and among us, and to be a light that reveals to us the beauty in our world and in each other. As Benny lights our shared chalice, I invite you to light your home chalice. Would you now say with me the words in the order of service and on the screen? Love is the spirit of this church, and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. One of the best gifts that we can give ourselves in our busy lives and in these challenging times is to take time for our spiritual lives. Each week, we create a time of shared stillness for prayer, reflection, gratitude, meditation, or simply being in order to remember who we truly are, reflect on life, and reconnect with the sacred mystery that is the very heart of life itself. Let us enter the stillness together. Life is a mystery. Part of our experience is struggle and loss. In the spirit of being a community of compassion and care, we take time to share those sorrows, struggles, and losses that are in our hearts right now. If you are on Zoom and have a sorrow, struggle, or loss to share, please use the chat box. David Weaver shares that Hale Dodds is back in rehab and would welcome calls or visits. He's at the Woodlands in Ravenna. He is struggling to cope and would appreciate our care. We send him love and healing thoughts. Heidi shares that her brother-in-law Scott got through a 14-hour surgery and is in recovery and has a complicated surgery ahead. Cancer stinks, and that is very true. We send your brother-in-law Scott our deepest love and concern. Mary Leeson and Randy Bish share that Cheryl Spoor is hospitalized and we are hoping for health and healing for her. We send Cheryl our love. She is a beloved member of this community, and we hope that recovery is fast and easy for her. Brooke asks for thoughts and prayers for her grandparents who both have COVID. and are struggling, we send them healing thoughts. Colin also shares a sorrow that they are fighting a massive migraine. We send hopeful healing to you, Colin. Our prayer this morning has God language. If that makes you uncomfortable, please feel free to substitute any word of your choice. Do we ever surprise you, God? Do we ever say or do things which catch you off guard? Or do you have everything under such tight control that nothing is left to chance? You are the ultimate mystery to us, but are we ever a mystery to you? Do you ever wonder why we turned out the way we did, like any mother does her children? They say you are omnipotent, able to move mountains or change the very laws of nature on a whim. They say you are constantly searching our hearts, weighing our souls, judging our worthiness. They say you already know our fate. Well, maybe so, but doesn't sound like much fun. All that running around and decision-making, like a weight of the world was on your shoulders. Not that I'm complaining, mind you. I'm grateful to be alive and appreciate all you've done, but I sure wouldn't want your job. No, I'd rather think you'd leave some things up to chance. After all, you did give us our freedom, didn't you? A little uncertainty, a bit of suspense, sounds a lot less boring than all that running around and judging all the time. You know, they also say that we are made in your image. If so, does that mean our faith in you is a reflection of your faith in us? O God, who sets the planets in their paths, who notes each sparrow's fall, each busy bee, may we be worthy of your faith in us. May we act with equity, compassion, and intention, so you don't have to all the time. And occasionally, just occasionally, may we surprise and delight you. Then you can have a day of rest too.
O Lord, O energy of the Lord. O Lord, O energy of the Lord. Please engage me in your service. Please engage me in your service. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Life also brings joy, wonder, and awe. We've experienced moments this week that lifted our spirits. Once again, please use the chat box to share your joys with us. I'm happy to say that Becky Haynes is recovering well and moving to a rehab center today. We will continue to send healing and love to Becky as she continues her healing journey. And Christy shares that gratitude for Georgia and the landscape team for all the beautiful plantings around Hobbs Hall and the church. With gratitude for these and every blessing we receive in life, for the gift of life itself, for companionship of one another on life's journey, for the beauty of this world and this day of possibility, we raise our hearts in gladness with the word, Amen. A reflection hymn is the Hal Walker Quartet singing Where Do We Come From? Please feel free to sing along.
Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Where do we come from? Where do we come from? Mystery, mystery, life is a riddle and a mystery. Mystery, mystery, life is a riddle and a mystery. Where do we come from? Where are we going? Where do we come from? Where are we going? Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Where do we come from? Mystery. What are we? Life. Where are we going? Where do we come from? Mystery. What are we? Life. Where are we going? Where do we come from? Mystery. What are we? Where are we going? Where do we come from? Mystery. What are we? Life. Where are we going? Where are we? Where are we going? Where do we come from? Mystery. What are we? Where are we going? Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Where are we? Where are we going? Where do we come? What are we? Where are we going? Where do we come? What are we? Where are we going? Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Where do we come? What are we? Where are we going?
Thank you, Hals. that. Well, a couple people told me that you can get away with things in a summer service that you can't do other times a year. So I thought I would test that theory out today. Because after all, you're a kind, forgiving group of people. You don't even believe in excommunication. So let's see what happens. In 2019, I was hired to do a lecture tour in Taiwan. Taiwan is a small island off the coast of China. And in preparation for that trip, I went out and I bought a brand new cell phone with an international calling plan. The idea was that I could use that phone to get directions, to find my way around, to get translation, to contact people there to help me with things, contact people at home. So after 23 grueling hours of travel, I arrived in Taiwan, turned on the phone, and it completely failed. It did work in a few of the hotel Wi-Fi systems, but otherwise it was useless. There I was on a beautiful tropical island in hotel rooms on hold with my service provider trying to get my phone corrected, and they never were able to fix it. I did have a host and a translator while I was in Taiwan, and they would meet with me at the lecture halls and help me in putting on our production, whatever you'd call it, but otherwise I was on my own. So there I was, 7,600 miles from home, in a country where everybody speaks Mandarin. And just when I'd start to map out in my head where I was, they'd move me to the next location. So I was constantly in a state of disorientation. Psychologically, I was off the map. I had none of those guidelines to get a sense of where I was going, what to do. Now I have to say that the people of Taiwan treat their guests like emperors. They put me up in these luxury hotels where the staff, whenever they saw me enter the building, they would yell, "Hello, Mr. Mike," which never ceased to startle me every time. I also had very enthusiastic crowds at the lectures. They were just so into the topic. And one woman came up to me during a break and said, "You are the best." And I swear for a second I thought she said, "You are a pest." But she was like smiling and bowing and things, so I decided to take it as a compliment. They also gave me gifts constantly. I was getting gifts left and right, far more than I could lug around. So I was giving them out as tips to cab drivers and things. But I was getting a serious case of imposter syndrome being out there. I was wondering, at what point are they going to figure out that I'm just some schlub from Ohio wearing a tie he bought at Walmart? And are they going to overthrow me like some disgraced dictator at some point? But they never did. They were fantastic. Now, people warned me before the trip that you should not drink the water in Taiwan if you're an American. I said the American digestive system can't handle it. I will develop a system, I thought, with all the enthusiasm of the passengers boarding the Titanic. My system, water bottles and various things, almost instantly failed when I walked up to a drinking fountain and glugged down a bunch of water before realizing what I'd done. This almost immediately completely shut down my digestive system for days and days and days, to the point where I was starting to worry I was going to have a medical crisis. The hotel staff figured out that I was ill, so then whenever I'd walk in the lobby, they would say, "How is your body, Mr. Mike?" I tried answering them, but I realized they basically used all the English they knew in formulating the question and didn't have enough left to actually receive an answer. I did find a pharmacy near one of the hotels, so I walked over there and I thought, even though everything's labeled in Mandarin, maybe I'll see some familiar products there and be able to get something I needed. I did not see anything familiar in that pharmacy, But in wandering around, I did find a section where they had little boxes of medicine with pictures of stomachs with, like circles around them, or arrows, or lightning coming off of them. And I thought, this is close, I'm close, but I still wasn't sure what each of them did. So I finally went up to one of the staff, and I asked her if she spoke English. And she immediately reared back in shock, as if I'd leaned in and proposed marriage to her. Trying to prove to her that I was not crazy, I immediately began miming out my digestive problem for her. And amazingly, she seemed to understand, because she pointed at a product and then started miming out a bodily function for me. A small crowd began to form. And here's the issue. I wasn't sure if she was acting out the problem or the solution. This required some next-level choreography for me to try to sort this out. It was the worst game of charades in human history. I walked out of that pharmacy with a bottle of tiny little white pills, knowing that they were either going to solve the problem or make it much worse. It was an act of faith, really. I went back to my hotel. Now, the hotel had this fancy electric toilet. It had 14 buttons on it to operate it, all labeled in Mandarin. I have to admit that I'm uncomfortable with a toilet that's smarter than I am. Like, was it judging me? And pushing those buttons to figure out what things did was kind of like playing Russian roulette with the nether regions. And are there even, there were 14 buttons. Are there 14 distinct things you even want to have happen in that area of your anatomy? Like, what do these buttons do? I was afraid it'd be like, eject. Post photo to Facebook. Ooh, colonoscopy. Ooh. But somewhere between the mysterious pills and the futuristic plumbing in Taiwan, the problem worked itself out. Let's never speak of this again. I told my 7-year-old that I'd be talking about this today, and she said it was inappropriate for a church service. So, I'm sorry, Katie, I didn't have enough time to come up with another story. Well, along the way on that trip, I went to an area called Pingtung. Now, Pingtung is on the far southern end of the country, where they rarely get Western visitors. So while in other parts in the country, I was able to, find somebody somewhere who could speak some English. In Pingtung, I could not find any. So my host dropped me off at the hotel that night, and I grabbed my camera. I decided I was going to walk around town and get some pictures. I came up with a system where I would go so many blocks one way or so many blocks another way to where I'd eventually end up back where I started. Wandered around, took some pictures, and once I was finally tired and about at the point where I thought I'd be re-emerging where my hotel was, I realized my system didn't work. I was completely lost. There I was, wandering around in the dark, alone in a city full of people who don't speak my language. My cell phone was about as useless as a block of wood. I couldn't use it for translation, for directions, to call anybody. Nobody knew where I was, and in fact, nobody knew I was missing. I was thousands and thousands of miles from home. I was a disoriented white guy walking through dark alleys with a $700 camera in his hands. I was really off the map. Now, the surprise ending of the story is I did not die. Were you wondering about that? I did not die. And I did find my way back to my hotel eventually. But the reason I'm telling the story is because It's an example of feeling off the map, feeling like I was missing the guidelines, the things I needed to get a sense of where I was in the world or what I was supposed to be doing. And the reason that's today's sermon topic is because that's where we are right now in human history. We are just beginning the greatest era of rapid change in all of human history. In fact, things that we used to use as guidelines that used to make sense, many of them don't make sense at all anymore. Some of them have even become a punchline, practically. For example, if you go to college, you'll be stable for the rest of your life. Social Security will be there to sustain you when you get old. If you work hard for a company, they will take care of you. So I'm going to tell you some kind of scary sounding things in the beginning. And let me tell you that I'm going to follow that up with some hope. So don't get too hung up in the scare. Economists are often referring to this era as end-stage capitalism, where a vanishingly small number of people own the vast majority of the wealth in the world. And it's gotten significantly worse even recently. The billionaire class became $2.6 trillion richer during the pandemic. And trillion, let me give you an example of what even 1 trillion is. If I counted to 1 trillion, how long do you think that would take? A week? A month? 30,000 years. So that $2.6 trillion richer that our billionaires got over the pandemic is a number that's even hard to wrap your head around. It was the largest transfer of wealth in human history. So sometimes modern life feels like we're at the end of a Monopoly game where somebody owns everything and we're just going in circles, hemorrhaging money until we all run out. And with that, that's a scare for democracy. Because with politicians on both sides of the aisle firmly in the pockets of those billionaires, are they really doing our bidding? And it gets even more complicated. Artificial intelligence. Some people are estimating that in the next 10 years, 50% of the current jobs will be automated. Are we making ourselves obsolete? AI in some ways is smarter than us, but is it ethical? It has no soul, has no conscience. In all the literature I'm reading on AI, one example keeps popping up over and over, and it's the example of the anthill. So imagine you're building a freeway, and as you're moving along your path, you get to a point where there's an anthill right in front of your path, right where you're headed. Do you route the freeway around the anthill? That would both be inefficient and dangerous for the freeway. So you pave right over it. You may not have anything against ants. They just happen to be in the way. So one anxiety some people have is, with AI, are we the ants? Ray Kurzweil, who's written some of the leading books on this topic, and who's also a researcher helping develop AI, said, you don't have to worry because it's not people against AI, it's people merging with AI. That AI can be used to enhance our thought processes, our memories, our abilities in ways that were never possible before. But in that, do we lose ourselves? Where do we begin and end? And honestly, it's folly to even talk about AI and speculate on it because it changes so rapidly. By the time the words come out of your mouth, they're outdated. So I'm not even going to predict where that's all headed, but things to be concerned about. So if our government, our economy, our technology all fuse into something unrecognizable kind of soon, you know, what kind of world are we in? We're in the most profound era of uncertainty in all of human history. Well, that's it. Have a good Sunday, everybody. Now, I promised you some hope, so that hope is on its way now. In times of profound uncertainty, we also have times of profound hope and profound possibilities. When we step off the map and go into the unknown, there are things that open up to us that were never available before. For example, when I was in Taiwan, I had all those hassles, but I had the greatest adventure of my life, perhaps, out there. I saw things and did things, and I recorded an album out there. I had amazing experiences, and it was all because I stepped away from all the familiar things and received whatever came my way. So when we look at the changes happening around us, it's very likely that, for example, the new technology and the other things evolving and changing around us will solve the problem of climate change. That they'll cure illnesses that have eluded doctors forever. They could correct things like systemic poverty. That we could enter into the greatest era of prosperity in all of history. And a lot of the news that scares us about the future is based on that hyperbolic hair-on-fire news coverage style. It's a business model that the media uses because you tune in more and you get more clicks. You click on more stories if they've got terrifying headlines in them. And we underestimate our ability to adapt as well. So yes, there will be change. Yes, we'll be unsettled sometimes. But it's important to recognize how well we do adapt. One way to look at that is to look at the past and how we adapted to other changes. So for example, when the telephone was first being brought into mass production, a New York Times article appeared that stated, "We are entering a slippery slope where we will become nothing but transparent heaps of jelly to each other." Another writer speculated that telephones would be used to communicate with the dead. That writer would be alarmed to see my inability to operate a cell phone in Taiwan. Then when trains came along and they started laying track all over the country, people feared this. They said bodies aren't meant to move at that speed. The body would melt or the limbs would be torn off their passengers. One writer said that if a woman's body was traveling at 50 miles an hour, her uterus would fly out of her body. Don't you hate when that happens? It's the worst. I read some Buddhist writings many years ago where a guy talked about walking through an open-air market in China. And there was one person who was selling chickens, and they were each in individual handmade cages. The cages were made of sticks held together by twine. And of course, the purpose was to sell these chickens so that people could take them home and slaughter them and make dinner. Well, one of the cages had ripped open, and the chicken had gotten out. But what the man observed was the chicken was desperately trying to get back in its cage. It was choosing the familiarity of the cage over the terrifying unknown of freedom. And are we doing that? When change happens, are we resisting things that could actually be wonderful? So going back to the era I talked about of telephones, telephones being new, or trains, people were kicking and screaming against, fighting against change, and against all these advancements. The average lifespan then was 40 years. There was no retirement, no workplace safety standards, no child labor laws. There was high infant mortality. So here they were fighting against all of that stuff that sustains us today, that we would never give away. So we have to embrace this change. We can't stop it. We have to find a way to embrace it. But we do need something to bring with us into that experience. Some kind of guidelines or principles, maybe even 7 principles. 8. See how much things change? 8 principles. Why was I not informed? Okay. So the UU principles hold up well to times of change. Because as things are changing, we want social justice. We want to protect one another. We want to seek fairness and truth. We want to protect the environment, regardless of what the change is going on around us. Also, I find some reassurance in the writers of the philosopher Albert Camus. Here's a quote from him. "The real problem is that we are machines, hungry for meaning and purpose, yet determined to look for it in a universe that is nevertheless cruel, unpredictable, and apparently completely apathetic to us." Does that make you feel better? Now, that was him identifying the problem. He had a solution. The solution was something he called absurdism. He said there are 3 courses of action. Number 1, refuse to play the game. Number 2, having faith that there's meaning somewhere. Number 3, the full recognition and acceptance of our absurd situation and not surrendering to that in a blaze of nihilism, but living in spite of it. This, he assures us, amounts to a revolt against meaninglessness itself. Finding meaning. Again, those principles, the UU principles apply there in finding meaning. So between the principles and Camus, we have something to apply, because AI, for example, is not an actual thought process. It only parrots the things that we feed into it. It's pattern recognition, and it churns out stereotypes. And you know what that means? It means that the heroes of the story are the divergent thinkers. The eccentrics, the creative people, the intellectually curious. It means that what we really need right now is a room full of weird people who aren't afraid to advocate for justice and positive change. Can you imagine a room like that somewhere? So yes, this is a time of change, and the truth is that nobody ever innovated by doing the same thing everyone else was doing. And we get to take a role in shaping that world, creating supportive community, engaging in critical thinking, working on all those values that are so important to us, creating that. So while this is the time of greatest uncertainty in human history, we come equipped with the values and principles to survive it and to thrive. So gather up your turkey basters, your free trade coffee, your petitions, your banakulas, and together we can be the change we want to see in the world. Let it be so, and amen.
Our spiritual community thrives in its shared life of worship and community and ministry as each of us participates in the circle of giving and receiving. This is possible due to your generous gifts of time, talent, and treasure, care for each other, and the recognition that we are all connected. To help others in our community thrive, we also give to agencies and organizations in Kent and beyond that serve those in need. June's special offering is for Ohioans for Reproductive Freedom, which is a coalition of statewide reproductive health, rights, and justice organizations working to ensure Ohioans have control over their own reproductive freedoms. In the spirit of gratitude for the gift of one another and this community, and the abundance that makes generosity possible, we now give and receive the offering as a sign of our shared commitment to the life and work of this congregation and beyond. Before we extinguish our chalice today, I have two brief announcements. There is a listening session about the budget happening in the sanctuary at 11:15. If you are interested in attending, the board is hosting that listening session. The service next week is, the time for the service next week is different than what's listed in the order of service. It is at 11, so we will begin gathering in community at Plum Creek Park at 10:30. A service focusing on our music ministry will begin at 11. If any musicians are interested, please see Katie. And there will be a potluck and games and community celebration after the picnic, or after the service. Will you join me now in saying the words as we extinguish our chalice? We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. May we carry these in our hearts and minds until we are together again.
Our benediction is another quote from Albert Camus. He said, "The only way to deal with an unfree world is to become so absolutely free that your very existence is an act of rebellion." Go in peace.